I'm Kate Breslin from the Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy, and welcome to this CHAMPS Zoom press conference. A little housekeeping, I'll be just moderating, and we'll hear from several speakers and then have an opportunity to for people to ask questions via the Q&A function. We'll be able to unmute folks if when the time comes. In the meantime, for everybody, if you can mute yourself if you're not speaking, I think that's the best way to go about it. So I'm representing the Children Need Amazing Parents campaign as part of Schuyler Center. And the CHAMPS campaign is grounded in research showing that children experience better outcomes when they live with families. We're dedicated to ensuring that kids remain safely with their families whenever possible. And that when they do enter foster care, that they are placed with kin or in a family. The COVID-19 crisis, which has uprooted the lives of everyone in New York, has exposed and exacerbated problems that already existed in New York's child welfare system. In particular, for a youth who's about to age out of foster care, the pandemic has just brought even greater uncertainty. Under normal circumstances, young people who transition out of foster care without a family already face instability in housing, income, and employment. In the middle of this global health crisis, when a safe and stable home are so critical to individual and public health, no individual and no young person should be pushed from their home or forced to leave without a family just because they have a birthday and they turn 21. So we're calling on Governor Cuomo to take executive action to ensure that all young people in foster care in New York have the option to remain in foster care until their after their 21st birthday for at least 180 days after the last region in the state is reopened. This action should be fully supported and funded by the state. And we also call on the state to allow young people who left foster care after age 18 voluntarily to return to care during this period. So we have a fantastic lineup of speakers today. Assemblymember Hevesy is a longtime champion and 2 years ago helped lead the passage of legislation that expanded kin gap to include fictive kin. I'll introduce everybody now, and then I'll just sort of make sure we transition through each person. Assemblymember Jaffe is a champion of all of the issues related to children and families in New York, and the chair of Children and Families, and championed the Transition Fund. Betsy Kramer from Lawyers for Children, Carrie Moles from CASA, New York City, Destiny Mora, an impacted youth, and Jeanette Rivera, an impacted young person, and Mary Keene from You Gotta Believe. So those will be our speakers. I'll help us transition from one to the next, and welcome. So first of all, Assemblymember Hevesy.
Can I ask you to switch the order and go to Ellen Jaffe first? She's
of course. Oh yes.
Better
yes, absolutely. We were debating it yesterday. We did it. We decided on alphabetical just because we thought it was.
I'm home, but I'm not crazy. So please let Ellen go first.
Assemblymember Jaffe.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, CHAMPS, for truly putting together this virtual press conference on such importance of keeping our foster youth in a stable, safe environment during this terrible time, this health crisis. As the youth mature, the more they need their families, not just to provide for their physical well-being, but to guide them in a positive manner, and most importantly, to be there to provide them with self-confidence that is so essential. Foster youth who transition out of foster care without a family face instability with regard to housing and income and employment, especially at this time. Now more than ever, our foster youth need the structure and stability that the foster care system provides for them. Family is a foundation in the child's life. The services that they are provided are the support system that strengthen the foundation. And in the middle of the global health pandemic, no person should be pushed from their home or be forced to leave foster care without a family simply because they turned 21. By temporarily placing a moratorium on aging out of foster care, we are working to ensure that that older foster youth are given the permanency that they need to thrive in New York State. The moratorium we are asking for will permit youth who recently exited care to re-enter quickly and to ensure the social service districts receive appropriate funding and support. Truly, I stand with CHAMPS. The work that you do is so essential. CHAMPS New York and Attorneys for Children Today to join my voice to call for Governor Cuomo to execute a temporary moratorium on aging out in New York State to give young people the option to remain in foster care after their 21st birthday throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. During these times, we must be the foundation for our foster youth, and we must be the ones to provide them with such important security. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Jaffe, and thank you, Assemblymember Hevesy. I just want to remind folks, please use the Q&A function at any time. You don't have to wait till later, but please go ahead and use that. And Assemblymember Hevesy, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Chairwoman Jaffe, for your leadership. And thank you to everybody else on the call. So look, this is a very dangerous time. And one of the populations that we really have to look out for, who are the most vulnerable, are kids aging out of foster care. Let me take a step back to suggest that we're calling on the governor to take action today, but that's in the context of Andrew Cuomo doing an outstanding job over the last couple of months, leading us through this pandemic. And his leadership has given comfort to my constituents, my family, all New Yorkers. You got to give the gentleman credit. And we need his assistance now. And we're talking about these kids aging out of foster care, not only because they're vulnerable all the time, but particularly in this crisis, because when these young people age out, what you'd like to do is set them up with jobs, and you'd like to set them up with stable places to live. There are no jobs now. Everybody's on unemployment. And there are very few stable places for them to live. So my limited understanding from this, and I'll listen to the experts, is you now have kids who are counting down to their 21st birthday, and where it used to be an opportunity to become self-sufficient, now it's a countdown where they're saying, oh no, I'm going to lose services and I'm going to be out on the street. And what happens to some of those kids, even pre-COVID, my understanding is they're much more likely to wind up on public assistance or much more likely to become homeless. And I will tell you from my limited knowledge of the homeless system, putting anybody who doesn't need into a shelter now, a congregate care setting, is dangerous. Congregate care shelters, particularly in New York City, the death rate from COVID is 56% higher than the average New Yorker. It's more than twice as dangerous for anybody to go into shelter. So when we're normally trying to help these kids age out, and give them the stable housing and give them the jobs that they need, well, we can't do that now. So these are two quick asks of our governor. We need him to hear us. The first quick ask is yes, we need a moratorium on kids aging out to give us more time to weather this pandemic, so we make sure 180 days after the state reopens fully, that we allow these kids the opportunity to get access to stable housing and get access to jobs, which they just wouldn't have now. And also for kids who are out there and who are struggling, it is cheaper for them to come back into the foster care system and get the care than it would be if we left them out on the street. Now, I appreciate that the state is in dire financial straits. The governor is right. We have a $15 billion deficit, but there will be money coming soon in the next couple of weeks. We don't know how much, but we can bank there will be money coming. And if not, we should create revenue. But in either way you slice it, wherever you get the revenue from, the bottom line is putting this moratorium in place and then allowing kids who are 18 to 21 to come back into the system now will save you money and offset costs, because otherwise those kids are going to wind up on public assistance in the shelter system, which is more expensive, and even worse, potentially in the hospital and sick. So on a human level and a financial level, the smart move is to do the moratorium and allow those kids to come back into care. I would not have known about this issue if it wasn't for CHAMPS and the Schuyler Center and Ellen and my friends here. So I thank you all for that. And I look forward to working with you to make this a reality. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Assemblymember Hevesy. Thank you. We are so blessed to have legislative champions who are strong and caring. So thank you. I'd like to transition now to Betsy Kramer from Lawyers for Children. The floor is yours, Betsy.
Thank you, Karen. I am Betsy Kramer, and I'm the Director of Public Policy and Special Litigation at Lawyers for Children. I'm speaking today on behalf of a coalition of attorneys from all around New York State who represent children in foster care. Attorneys from Suffolk, Rockland, Buffalo, Elmira, Ithaca, Rochester, and all 5 boroughs of New York City. In one of his earliest actions upon declaring a state of emergency, Governor Cuomo recognized that this was no time for New Yorkers to be thrown out of their homes. Back on March 20th, he issued an executive order that placed a moratorium on evictions. Unfortunately, that moratorium did not apply to some of the most vulnerable New Yorkers, and there's been no action to protect youth who are turning 21 from being evicted from their foster homes in the middle of this pandemic. In April, our coalition of attorneys sent a letter to Governor Cuomo asking that he take 2 actions to protect youth who are aging out of foster care. Number 1, place a moratorium on discharging youth from foster care at age 21 without the youth's consent. And 2, suspend the statutory requirement for court approval prior to being allowed to return to foster care after age 18. In response, we received a letter from the state's Office of Children and Family Services, which acknowledged that since March, a number of young people had been, quote unquote, released from their foster homes at age 21. But foster care isn't prison and it isn't detention. Foster care is their home and their safety net. It's supposed to protect them from abuse, exploitation, and homelessness. Children are placed in foster care precisely because they don't have a family who can care for them. Release at age 21 is not a reward. The state is supposed to act as parents' patriae in the place of the parent to care for the child. No decent parent would evict their child in the middle of a pandemic, and New York State shouldn't either. And just as so many decent parents have allowed their older children to return home during this time, New York State should allow young people who have no place else to return to foster care. With access to the family court severely limited, we have little recourse to ensure that youth are not discharged from foster care before they're ready, before they have stable housing or health care or a source of income. And we have no ability to enforce the rights of youth who are under the age of 21 to return to foster care should they find themselves without a place to live. We're calling on Governor Cuomo to help protect our clients by ensuring that no young person is released from foster care to homelessness while New York is in a state of emergency. Our clients deserve better from the state acting as their parents. Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy. I'd now like to introduce Carrie Moles from CASA NYC. There you are. You're on mute still.
Sorry. Okay, you can hear me now? Okay. All right, so good morning. Thanks everyone again for joining us. I'm Carrie Moles. I'm the Executive Director of Court-Appointed Special Advocates of New York City, CASA NYC, which is one of a network of CASA programs in 27 counties in New York State. So I'm proud to represent the New York State CASA Association today. We are volunteer-based nonprofit organizations that advocate to ensure the safety and well-being of children and youth involved in child abuse and neglect proceedings in New York. CASA is appointed to the cases of children and youth in foster care by family court judges when they are concerned that a child in care is at risk of falling through the cracks of the system. Very often that includes cases of young adults who are aging out of the system without the resources and support and services that they need to be able to live independently and to avoid some of the negative outcomes that we often see are so common to young people aging out of care, including homelessness and unemployment and incarceration and many others. And our cases often also include many cases of young people who are aging out of care who have children of their own, because young people who've experienced foster care have very high rates of early pregnancy, and their children in turn are at very high risk of foster care placement. At CASA NYC, a couple of years back, we were fortunate to have the support of our board and foundation supporters to be able to extend our services to youth transitioning from foster care up to the age of 25. And we did this so that we can continue working with them long after they're discharged from foster care, because we recognize that after discharge from foster care, when all of the system supports suddenly go away, this is when young people are at the greatest risk, and they need our support at this time more than ever. But CASA NYC only serves about 10% of the youth in New York City foster care. So unless a young person aging out of care happens to have been assigned to CASA NYC, they are often completely on their own. And what we've seen time and time again is that even the best laid plans, even without a pandemic, often fall apart quickly. So the housing that their caseworker and attorney and judge thought was stable when they were discharged from foster care suddenly becomes unstable. The family member they were staying with kicks them out after a couple of months, or they lose their job and they can't pay the rent, or they don't get the grades they need to maintain their funding for college, so they get kicked out of their dorms. Sometimes they lose their childcare because their babysitter quits, so they can't go to work, so they lose their job. Or they lose their benefits, their public health benefits, or their public assistance, or their SNAP benefits because of some bureaucratic mistake. So I can give you dozens of examples off the top of my head about how youth who've been discharged from care suddenly become destabilized and in need of our support. During the pandemic, during this pandemic, almost every single one of the young adults we're working with has become unemployed. There are very few exceptions to that. And the moratorium on evictions from housing in New York State is literally saving their lives in many cases. So we do thank Governor Cuomo for that. So why wouldn't the governor also place a moratorium on evicting young people who are in foster care from their foster homes and the support systems that they need now more than ever? Which is not to say that many foster care agencies don't and won't continue to provide support to those young people. Many of them do, but the agencies are often also greatly impacted by this pandemic, and they're understaffed and they're under-resourced. And because the court closures, there's less oversight by the courts of what's going on with those agencies. So it can't be optional, and it needs to also be funded. So to illustrate this point, I would love to introduce two exceptional young women who we have had the pleasure of working with at CASA NYC. One who will age out of foster care in a couple of weeks, Destiny Mora, and one who aged out about a year ago, Jeanette Rivera. They are both incredible advocates for themselves, and I want to be clear that in many ways, Jeanette and Destiny are in better situations than most of the young people who are aging out of the system. So they are generously and bravely sharing their experiences as a way of advocating for other young people in the foster care system in New York State who might not have the same supports that they have. So I would, with that, like to introduce Destiny Mora.
Hi, good morning. Thank you everyone for being here and advocating for us. On June 11th of this year, I turned 21 years old. That is literally, like she said, in 2 weeks. The current age where foster care youth must discontinue services. I was in my last few years of care and decided to remain and continue consent to do so. I did this to obtain more life structuring opportunities as well as having security while waiting for housing. One of my last achievements while in care was being accepted into the dorm project. It's a great program, it's supportive, and it seemed to be the security I need. Not only like a form of temporary shelter, but it introduces me and preps me for independent living. In January of 2020, a global pandemic struck, affecting policies worldwide. I was ordered to move out of my dorm within 48 hours with two options: go back to residential care, which I worked extremely hard to step down, or to go back to the home where my case began. So on top of that setback, I had to maintain a 3.6 GPA, and I have to worry about being forced out of my safety net within 2 weeks. Many things prior to COVID within my case haven't even been dealt with yet, such as NYCHA, which is housing, like responding to me, accepting me into my own home, and even my agency having having lack in dealing with my vital documents. Like I have no possession of them, and even one was misplaced. So just the uncertainty of things prior to COVID-19, you know, it's like it hasn't been addressed yet, let alone being forced out before those things are addressed. So I feel like it is just inhumane, unjust to judge our readiness by age. Realistically, the age for us to apply for benefits such as SNAP, mentioned earlier, housing, etc., by 18, we are legally allowed to apply. How is it that we are expected to have everything we need covered by just applying at 18 at the age of 21? It's not for me, it was possible. I don't know who is it possible for, but leaving me with fears, uncertainty, with no secure apartment, none of my vital documents. Someone with political power like Governor Cuomo should not allow treatment to the kids of our future. Any one of your children, any one of anyone's children, can turn 21 and have hardships, and you will not hesitate but to provide what is in their best interests. And that's just because we're all human. People deserve, you know, to be treated with care. And especially if the city takes over the role of our parents, you know, it doesn't really feel equivalent to the real deal, which is obvious. So while things are hard and getting harder during this pandemic, there should be a moment of realism that can cause things to just be a bit easier for us. Just suggesting. Foster care needs help. It might not only help the youth, but the workers as well, who need to balance one thing at a time while dealing with the limited resources, again, as mentioned earlier, such as like closed courts, closed benefit offices. It's like we can't keep up with each other. So please, until COVID-19 is lifted to the point where essential resources are back and running, maybe we can pause discharges. We need it more than you understand. Foster adults should be in their own housing before any safe, or any safe, solid, independent housing, independent opportunities of all sorts before being cut off. And it should be, you know, witnessed, examined, and like confirmed that we are okay first before anything else, especially during a pandemic. I'm scared. But with CASA and people outside of, you know, my circle are the ones helping me most. So hopefully this works. This brings awareness. It's really important for us. We deserve this. Even the youth that haven't done as much as me. I mean, I know I work too hard and I advocate too hard for myself to be unsure or be not cared for. So I just want to say thank you again for letting me even express myself the way I feel comfortable doing so. And I hope this goes somewhere, guys. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Destiny. Now, I'm not sure, Jeanette, did you want to say a few words or just be available for questions?
I was also going to speak as well, if you guys would like.
Great.
Okay, so hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you guys for having me. I want to give you guys a little bit of a background of how my time was in care and how this pandemic is affecting me right now. So I entered care when I was 14 to the age of 21. I turned 21 last year in 2019. When I aged out of care, I did age out with some type of housing. I was living in Nitra. I had a 1-bedroom, but a couple months after I had aged out, I was going through so much. I had a domestic violence case open. I had 3 babies, and I didn't have any money to move. I didn't have any support, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Now, place yourself in the middle of a pandemic. You just turned 21. On my birthday, we signed the papers. They didn't wait. They didn't make sure that I was ready to be on my own. They didn't make sure that I had food, that my bills were paid, that I even understood how to pay my portion of my rent. Being on public assistance for the first time, one of the most struggling things was learning how to pay my own portion of rent, what I had to pay, childcare, how my babies were going to be in school, how I was going to be able to work to put the next plate of food on the table. It was very struggling at that point in time. And in the middle of a pandemic, you can't think about yourself. You have to be selfless when you have children on the line. And being a product of the system, they look at us first. So place yourself in the middle of a pandemic and you lost your job. Now you don't know how you're going to pay rent. Now you don't have any Wi-Fi or internet to get on the school application, the school websites, to do any homeschooling with your children. Now you're facing ACS. Now you're facing possibly losing your children. For me, that is my biggest fear. I feel like even aging out of foster care is a consistent battle because I have to maintain my living situation. I have to take care of my children. I have to stay out of ACS's limelight because it's so struggling. It's very, very struggling because they always look at us as, oh, she's a bad person because she was in care. Maybe she wanted to be placed there. But the reality of it is none of us asked to be in care. None of us asked to go through the things that we were going through. We're just trying to survive. We're just trying to be better products of society. We're trying to become nurses, doctors. We want to help our community. So I'm here today to speak on behalf of all foster youth that are on the street because we can't even sleep on the train anymore. There was a point in time where I could at least know that I can sleep one full night on the train back and forth and that would be okay. Now we can't even sleep on the train. We're banned from the trains. There's no safe place with this pandemic. There's no safe place for our youth right now. And I feel as if Governor Cuomo needs to open his eyes and see how very important this is for our youth to have a safe place to stay, because imagine with 3 children, me on the street, what would I eat? Where would we go? There's no safe place. Every place is infected. Every place is under watch. We can't even go to the public parks. Like, this is the most scariest time of my life. And I can't even stress how scary it is for our younger youth that are on the street that don't have a mother and a father. My mom and my dad died before I could even get a chance to meet them. So all I've ever known was the state, my lawyers, judges, workers, and I'm so grateful to have the support that I have now. And this is why I'm so happy that we're all fighting so that our children can also have that support. Because God forbid if something was to ever happen to me, I want to know that New York State will be able to make sure that my children are taken care of, because New York State was my mother and my father. So I want to speak today based on making sure that we have a safe place to go. We actually have a place for shelter. The shelters are not safe. The streets are not safe. The trains are not safe. No place is safe. So I just want to say thank you for listening to a little bit of my story and everything that I've been through, and just know that I'm open to any questions and anything you guys want to ask. I'm open to.
Thank you. We're so appreciative, especially of you, Jeanette, and you, Destiny, for sharing your personal experience. It means a lot. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You're getting a lot of shout outs. I don't know if you can see them, but you're getting a lot of shout outs from the participants. So now is the time we're going to turn to kind of questions and that sort of thing. One of the first questions that came in was regarding what would the cost to the state be of implementing the option to remain, to keep kids from aging out during the pandemic. And our estimate, and we think it might be a high estimate, is about $1.8 million. We're not precisely sure, but that's our estimate. We base it on the number of kids we think might age out, and and what the potential costs would be. And we have some other questions, and I'm hopeful that some of my fellow panelists might be able to answer. What are some of the factors that contribute to youth deciding to leave foster care during COVID? Like what factors might affect somebody leaving? And then a follow-up question, is any follow-up required if a young person signs themselves out of care without a transition plan? I'm not sure who might, Crystal, Crystal from the Schuyler Center, could you please answer that?
It looks like Betsy might be able to answer.
Great, thanks. Betsy, sorry about that.
No problem. You know, right, our biggest concern right now is that the factor that leads young people to leave foster care at age 21 is the statutory provisions that end foster care at age 21. Although the social services districts, the foster care agencies certainly have the discretion to keep children after, or young people after they turn 21, there's no legal requirement that they do that. Young people sometimes leave before they're 21. They have the right to leave when they're 18. Sometimes they believe that they're ready to go. Some young people do have a place to live. Some people do have a source of income. Unfortunately, now in particular, sometimes those things fall apart and they find themselves in crisis and needing to return to foster care. Sometimes they don't feel welcome in their foster homes. And sometimes they feel like they're ready when they aren't ready. Sometimes they hope to return to their biological families who really can't care for them. And after a period of time being there, they realize that it's not a stable or safe place to be and they need to return to placement. With respect to the question of what aftercare is required, when young people leave care between the ages of 18 to 21, the foster care agency or the social services district are required to provide supervision and follow-up until they turn 21, which would mean at least monthly visits and referrals to services and supports that might be helpful to them, and also the opportunity to return to foster care if they find themselves with no other option. The problem with that, as we said, is that court approval is required to formalize a return to foster care, and we don't have access to the courts right now to make that happen. Once a young person leaves at 21 without a plan, there's no follow-up required.
I see no further questions, I think. If anybody else has questions, please go ahead and type into the Q&A. I want to, for Jeanette, how did your contact with your case planner, lawyer, and advocate change after you turned 21? Were you still able to get in touch, or who was available to you after you turned 21?
Okay, so basically after I turned 21, there was no follow-up. I don't speak to any of the case planners. I don't speak to any of the judges, lawyers, anyone from my agency. I don't speak to anyone. They've never called, haven't wished me a happy birthday or how is it, how are you and the children, anything. Once you sign that paper and it's over, it's over. The only support I've ever had is from CASA. And that is the greatest support that I will ever have. And I think that it's the most beautiful thing. And I think that everyone should have a CASA, because if I didn't have a CASA, I don't know where I would be right now. So I have one law guardian that got really close. And I feel like once you're passionate about your work and once you're passionate about helping the youth and making it your world, you're going to stay in contact no matter what. So I feel like the people who are most passionate and who really care about me and want to see me succeed in life are those that I have right now as a support system. But in terms of the agencies and stuff, it's really sad. They don't reach out. They haven't called. They haven't looked out. But I think this is why we're all here today, because we want this to change. We want people to have a backup plan. We want people to have a support system, and we want these agencies to reach out to the children to make sure that things are okay, because yes, I may be 21, I may have housing, but the statistics show within the next 6 months, most of the children who age out can't even hold an apartment. They can't pay rent after 6 months. They most likely get evicted. So this is what we want to change. To answer your question, no, I didn't have much support. And
yeah. That's what it sounds like. Yeah, thank you. So
Can I add something to that?
all of us, oh, of course, Carrie.
I just wanted to say that, you know, there are, thank you, Jeanette, for the CASA shout out, but there are also other agencies like You Gotta Believe, Mary Keene, who I think is going to speak next, and City Living, and there are other organizations that do, you know, they're nonprofits and they do work to support young people after they've aged out of care, but it depends on those young people finding those organizations or somehow being connected with them. So it's not, you know, it's not systemic. And when they're with CASA, we're working to connect them with all these other organizations, and, you know, we all sort of work together, but it's a relatively small percentage of the youth. So the safety net needs to be, you know, for everybody.
And actually, I'm glad you mentioned Mary. I erred in not introducing Mary early. Mary Kane from You Gotta Believe. Please, we'd like you to make some remarks. And then one of the questions, so I'd like one of the questions is to the assembly members. So after Mary speaks, and the question is, so how do we get this executive order signed? So if you can think about that while Mary speaks, that would be great. Go ahead, Mary.
Great. Thanks, Kate. No problem. You're doing a great job emceeing. It's tough work. So, hi, I'm Mary Keene. I'm the executive director of You Gotta Believe. And we've been around for 25 years, and we're sort of contrarian. We don't believe there's any such thing as independent living. And so human beings are not meant for that, and they need family. And this pandemic has really highlighted that. Everyone has turned to their family. Many have moved back in with their family. Many have just stayed more connected than they ever have. Whether you haven't spoken to your family, you're speaking to them now. This is a time for family to gather. And 21 should be a time of celebration. You know, most youth I know, when they turn 21, they're excited about going out and drinking legally. You know, it's the first time they'll do it legally. And our kids in care, it's a very, very dark time. It's like this huge cloud over their head. And you've heard horror stories about what happens to our kids when they age out. It's obviously exponentially worse now during the pandemic, but it should never happen. And the federal legislation says that kids coming into care need to leave with a family, and nothing less than that. And I think that's criminal that we don't do that. But certainly during the pandemic, there has to be a moratorium. We cannot, this is inhumane to allow our kids. You know, Destiny mentioned, I've spoken to her, being 21 in 2 weeks, she's terrified. She shouldn't be like that. She shouldn't have those fears and that anxiety. She's trying to get through school. She's done everything she was told to do, and her world is falling apart. And we've spoken about, you know, we're gonna work on getting her a family because that's what she deserves. It is no one's fault. Jeanette, it is not her fault that she lost her family. And we need to do that. But at the very least, we have to stop the idea that these kids are going to be okay going out into the world now on their own. It's a fallacy. It's a setup for failure for them. Jeanette talked about, you know, they can't survive in housing. You know, housing's not the answer. They can't survive for 6 months. They don't know how to manage. They need people. We all have family. We all have it. We've all turned to it during this pandemic. We count on them. We would never do this to our own children. And the governor has done a phenomenal job. I had no idea he was so, you know, extraordinary. He's really stepped up. And I cannot believe if he has an understanding of this, that he would allow our kids to age out at this point in time. So 180 day to me is a minimum. I think there should be a moratorium on kids aging out without family permanently, but I'm not going to get that today. So I'll accept the 180 day moratorium, but it's the least that we can do for our kids. So thank you everyone for all your advocacy for this. I've met with Assemblymember Jaffe and Hevesy, and the extraordinary advocates for this work. So I really appreciate their participation. And thank you to everybody else. Kate, back to you.
Thank you, Mary. One of the questions, as I said earlier, is directed at our assembly members about how do we get this thing signed?
Ellen, were you want
Who'd
me to
like
take
to go
that, or?
first?
Yeah, well, you can go right ahead, Andrew, Assembly Member.
It's funny when they ask for where the money comes from, I can answer. Okay. So so first, I got a good answer to this, but let me take a step back because I don't want to miss an opportunity to say thank you, particularly to Jeanette and Destiny. You know, just hearing your stories really helps me to put a face on it. It means a lot. I don't want to over or underplay it, but it really helped me, and it means a lot for everybody to understand what you're going through. And I'm proud of you. I'm not, you know, I can't believe I'm old enough that I'm like your dad, I guess, but like, I'm proud of you guys. You guys did a great job here today, and it helps me really put a face on this. As to the money question, so we gave Governor Cuomo the ability to write executive orders that have the force of law. We did that a couple of months ago pre-COVID, and I didn't think it was a great idea because basically it cuts the legislature out of the process a little bit, but it was done for this express purpose. So when you have COVID and when you have a real problem, you want the governor to be able to act swiftly. He has that power now, and I suggest he use it. Now, my gut is the governor will be hesitant to start doing things that cost money. Because he is legitimately facing a $15 billion deficit, but that deficit's not going to hold. And he knows that. There is money coming from the federal government, and if not, we have the ability to raise revenue. The way I would implore the governor to look at this is, number one, on a human level, if you look at Jeanette and you look at Destiny and the other kids, they're not kids, the other young ladies and men from foster care, they need the help. So it's the right moral thing to do. But again, if you're just looking from this, from a budget perspective, this is the way to save money. You don't not do the right thing and incur costs longer down the road. So the governor, with the stroke of his pen, which we gave him the authority to do this, can do that in one shot. He can help these kids and also save the state money, and I think he'll get there.
Well, thank you. You know, Assemblyman, that's exactly the focus that we need. We need to reach out to the governor through and have some very strong conversations about why this is such an essential thing that we need to move forward with. And, you know, in the long run, it saves money. In the long run, it does, because it in a much better way, it establishes much more stability for the youth and then for their future and the future of our state. But we need to reach out. We need to be very vocal, both through letters and phone calls, and seeing if we can establish some meetings with some of the leaders in the governor's office, and you know, within a very short period of time, speak to this issue. It will be it is something that I believe is really essential in our action. And, you know, I was very impressed with Jeanette and Destiny, and they're very articulate. They are a future. Give them that stability, and that is something that in the long run is so important for our state and our communities. So I think that it's something that we need to work together and bring some of our colleagues with us to join in responding to this request.
Thank you. We have a couple of other questions specifically for Jeanette and Destiny, and maybe for others who work with other youth, about what you see happening to any of your friends who are aging out. Do you have?
For 1 second,
Yeah,
I apologize.
sorry.
Just one.
Go ahead, please.
And I apologize, but I feel, you know, I missed an opportunity. In addition to the possibility of getting an executive order out of the governor, we're legislating again. The New York State Legislature is back in business. We started yesterday. We're there today. I think the governor can do this quickly, and he should do this, and I would like to work with him and his staff, and I implore them to do this. But there is another option that we could legislate and have a full conversation about this. So that's also in the offering. It's not a one and done thing. So I'm sorry to jump back in, but that's
No,
important to
thank
know.
you. I think that's a great point. I think we got to pursue all options. I think the most straightforward way is for the governor. It's been done in 9 other states. Executive action has been taken to do this very thing.
Yep.
Put a moratorium on aging out in the context of COVID-19. It's already been done in 9 other states. It's by executive order, which is, we believe, the most expeditious route. But I think we would love to also be pushing it legislatively as well. So there was a question about what you see happening kind of with your Destiny and Jeanette, with your, people you knew or know who are, in your age group. Are they in stable housing, or are they not in stable housing, or those sorts of things? Jobs, school, housing.
So I guess I'll start off responding. My friends, some of them have housing, and a lot of them don't. The vast majority of my friends don't have housing. Everyone has lost their job, and now we're on a fight to try to get unemployment, which isn't easy because there's so many people filing. We can't get on the phone with anyone. We can't get our claims processed. We can't get any help. And then if there's an error with our claim or with anything, we can't get back in touch. No one's picking up the phone for 311. A lot of people are running the streets, and they can't get into the shelters. The shelters are overpacked. Now they're supposed to be opening hotels to put the people in, but there's not enough of those either. So a lot of my friends are really struggling right now. Like, they don't have food, they don't have shelter, they don't have a job. You can't get unemployment. It's not as easy as some people think it is just to apply online or call, because as soon as you call, they hang up on you because the line is so busy. So the people that I know are really struggling right now. And if we had the option to be able to stay in care, a lot of us would have chosen to stay in for a little bit longer so that we can get that support, so that we can kind of have people to call, because it's nothing like being in the middle of a pandemic and you don't have a person to call. You can't call anyone for help. You can't call anyone for guidance or just to talk. You know what I mean? So, like, a lot of people I know are really struggling, and I don't know about, I guess I'll let Destiny answer.
Thank you, Jeanette. Destiny, did you have anything you wanted to talk about, respond?
Well, like, I didn't bring much friends along with me from the agency. I do, however, have most of them on social media platforms, and I can observe what I can assume would be some are back with family. It was at least 2 or 3 people I know that got their apartment by 21, which didn't happen for me. I'm still waiting for my apartment, but yeah, I don't really have much hands-on, like, observation on details and how other people are doing, because it's a time to fend for yourself, honestly. In my situation, NYCHA hasn't responded, and I applied at 18. That's why I mentioned earlier, like, why is it expected by 21 for everything we need to be available for us? It's impossible. Some are possible, but some aren't. But I'm pretty sure even if they have housing, even if they're back with family, there's something always happening. There's something always need extra change, extra questions, extra answers. And I think during this time, there's a lot of cut off resources, cut off answers. So either way, even if it's easier for some, it's still difficult for all. So that's it.
Thank you. I want to just, there's a question about paying for it and whether counties would put forward money if a moratorium were enacted. The reality of this is that this is a state responsibility, and it should be paid for by the state. And frankly, as our assembly members mentioned, you know, the state is facing a deficit, and local governments are too. And this is it's a state responsibility. The state should bear the cost of the moratorium. We have another question around if a former foster youth under 21 wanted to re-enter care today. So somebody who had presumably left sometime after 18 and was not yet 21, wanted to re-enter, what legal steps could be taken? Does somebody want to answer that question?
So I can answer that because we before the courts largely shut down, we dealt with that at Lawyers for Children on a fairly regular basis. Several years ago, the legislature passed a law that amended the Family Court Act that allowed young people to petition the court for approval to return to foster care if they had left at age 18, thinking they were ready to be on their own and needed to return before they turned 21. Court approval is required to formalize the return to foster care. And because we have very, very limited access to the family courts right now, seeking that approval is difficult, if not impossible, in many places.
Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate all the participants today. Thank you for joining us and for expressing your care and concern about this really important issue. A big shout out to everybody who joined us as panelists as well, and especially our young people, Destiny and Jeanette. And we're going to be working on this. All of us panelists are available to answer questions and reach out by email to any one of us, email, phone. We'll connect you with each other if we're not the right ones to answer. So, so please feel free to reach out to any one of us, and we'll make sure you get answers to questions. Thank you.